Here's something almost nobody warns you about. The single most common way to draw money out of your retirement accounts is also one of the surest ways to shortchange yourself in the years when you can still enjoy it. And the people doing it aren't reckless. They're careful, they're disciplined. They spent their whole lives being told that the goal was to protect the balance. So that's exactly what they do. And it backfires. Let me show you what I mean, and then let me show you a better way to think about it. A few years ago, J.P. Morgan teamed up with the Employee Benefit Research Institute and did something most studies never do. Instead of asking people what they thought they'd do, they looked at what people actually did. They tracked roughly 31,000 individuals approaching and moving through retirement over a 5-year stretch, matching real account data against real household spending. And two numbers jumped off the page. First, about 80% of retirees didn't pull a single dollar out of their retirement accounts until the government forced them to. And second, once they hit the age where withdrawals become mandatory, 84% of them took only the required minimum, not a dollar more. The researchers were pretty direct about why. People are so afraid of running out of money late in life that they're willing to sacrifice their actual lifestyle to protect against it. Now, being careful with your money is a good instinct. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to be reckless, but there's a difference between being conservative and neglecting yourself, and a huge number of retirees have quietly crossed that line without realizing it. Because here's the problem with letting the required minimum distribution set your spending. It creates a mismatch. It misaligns how you take money out with how you'd actually want to live. Let me explain what I mean by a mismatch. When you take only the minimum out of a traditional retirement account, the math is designed to stretch that money across your entire lifetime, and often well beyond it. So the practical result is that you spend the least in the years you can do the most, and the account is at its biggest right around the time you're least able to use it. If your intent is to leave a large inheritance, that's a perfectly fine outcome, and there's nothing wrong with it. But in this study, for the overwhelming majority of people, that was not the plan. They weren't underspending on purpose to leave a legacy. They were underspending out of fear and leaving the legacy by accident while denying themselves along the way. I want to make this concrete, so let me tell you about someone. I'm going to call her Ruth. Ruth is a composite, not one specific person, but she's stitched together from a pattern I have seen play out again and again. Ruth lived to 100 years old, and if you'd watched her whole retirement, you'd have seen it move through 3 very different chapters. In her 60s and into her 70s, Ruth was going everywhere. She flew across the country to visit her grandkids. She took the whole family on a cruise for her 80th birthday because she wanted everyone together while she still had the energy to enjoy it. That was Ruth at full strength. Then came the middle stretch. Somewhere in her early 80s, the travel started going the other direction. The family came to see her instead. She was still sharp, still delighted to see everybody, still jumping up for a hug the second you walked in the door. But she'd have to sit back down after. The tank just didn't hold as much anymore. And then the last chapter. By her late 80s, she'd moved into a single-level place in a nice retirement community. Her world got smaller and closer to home. Her joy came from her friends down the hall and the little things she did with them, not from spending money on big experiences. She barely spent anything in those final years, not out of discipline, but because that stage of life simply doesn't cost much. Here's the point of Ruth's story, and it's the thing almost none of us plan for. We assume the person we are today, with today's energy, is the person who's going to be spending this money 30 years from now. And that is almost never true. Your capacity to go and do and travel and enjoy is highest early, and it declines. Retirement spending isn't a flat line. For most people, it looks like a smile that fades, high in the active years, lower in the middle years, low again at the very end when needs shift mostly to care. So now put those two pictures side by side. On one side, you've got real life, where your ability to enjoy money is front-loaded into your 60s and 70s. On the other side, you've got the required minimum approach, where your biggest withdrawal years are pushed way out into your 90s. That gap between the two is the mismatch. That's the trap. Let me show you the numbers because they're honestly a little shocking. And don't worry, you don't need to be a math person. If you can read, you can follow this. Say you've got $100,000 in a traditional IRA. I'm using a round number so it's easy to see. Scale it up or down for your own situation. Now let's say you're like the 84% in that study, and every year you take out exactly the required minimum and nothing more, starting at the age the rules require. In the first required year, the government has you divide your balance by about 26 and a half, so you take out a little under 4%. The next year, the divisor drops slightly, so the percentage ticks up, and it keeps ticking up every single year for the rest of your life. Now let's be conservative on the growth side too. Assume the account earns only a modest return in the neighborhood of what a long-term government bond pays. When you run that forward, here's what falls out. Your single biggest spending year doesn't land in your active 60s or 70s. It lands somewhere in your mid-90s. Read that again. Under the take only the minimum approach, you are mathematically set up to spend the most in the years when you're statistically the least able to go anywhere or do anything with it. That's not a plan, that's an accident of the formula. Now, a couple of quick clarifications because the rules here trip people up. First, which accounts even have a required minimum distribution? The short version, the accounts where you got a tax break on the way in are the ones the government eventually forces you to draw down. That's your traditional IRA, your 401k, your 403b, your 457b, your SEP IRA, your simple IRA. Roth accounts are the exception. Because you already paid the tax, Roth IRAs and, as of recently, Roth 401ks have no required distributions during your lifetime. That's one of the quiet superpowers of a Roth. Second, the age. Under the current rules, required minimum distributions now begin at age 73 for most people retiring today, and that threshold is scheduled to move to 75 in the next decade. So this isn't some far-off problem, and it's worth knowing exactly when yours kicks in. Now, you might be thinking, isn't the required minimum at least better than that old 4% rule everyone talks about? The 4% rule, if you haven't heard it, says you withdraw 4% of your savings the first year and then adjust that dollar amount for inflation every year after. And honestly, yes, in a lot of cases, the required minimum method does end up being more flexible than a rigid 4% because it actually responds to how your account is doing. But here's the catch that applies to both of them. They're both built to protect the balance first and fund your life second. With the 4% rule, because your investments often earn more than 4%, there's a very real chance you die with roughly as much as you started with, having tiptoed around your own money for 30 years. Same underlying mistake. Same misalignment. So what's the actual takeaway here? It's not spend recklessly, it's this. The way you draw money out of your retirement account should be built around the life you actually want to live, not around a formula whose only job is to make the balance last. Front load for the go-go years, plan for the slowdown, and understand that conservative is supposed to mean your money lasts, not that you spend the best decade of your retirement afraid to touch it. A withdrawal strategy that lines up with how people actually live will do two things at once. It'll raise your quality of life in the years that matter most, and it'll shrink the odds that you accidentally leave a giant pile of money behind that you never meant to leave. If this made you rethink the just take the minimum advice, do me a favor and send it to someone you love who's retired or getting close, because this is exactly the kind of thing nobody tells them until it's too late to fix. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe so the next breakdown finds you. If you want, drop the word align in the comments so I know this one landed. Quick but important note before you go. I'm Tom Miller, and I make these to teach, not to give you personal financial advice. I'm not a licensed financial advisor or a CPA, and this video doesn't create any kind of professional relationship. Your own numbers, your tax situation, your health, and how long you expect the money to last are all specific to you, and the required distribution rules and figures do change over time. Ruth is an illustrative composite, not a real client. Before you change how you draw down your accounts, sit down with a qualified fee-only fiduciary advisor or a CPA who can look at your actual situation. I'll see you in the next one.